Hello and welcome to After Effects Tech Desk. Today we're going to talk about how to create these flying arrows, which are a popular element in motion graphics. And that's for a good reason. They're dynamic, they help with drawing your eye where to look, and they make for great little eye candy elements when animating on and off. There are a few steps to the process, so at first it might seem a little complex, but once you've done it a few times, you'll get used to it and it really goes pretty quick. So let's dive in. Okay, so if we look at some of the examples from that preview, we have just the straight arrow. We have the zigzag stroke arrow, which is basically the same thing with a little bit of a zigzag effect on the tail. We have the kind of stock chart looking arrow, which is angular. Then we have the curvy looping arrow. This technique can also be used for other things. For example, something like a paper airplane, which is using the same exact path as that looping arrow. So let's dive back in and we'll take a look at this first one again. Okay, so if you have something like this first one and it's just following a straight path, it can be pretty simple. You can have your arrowhead and a matte layer attached to a null. So if I twirl this down and see at the keyframes, there's the position is animating on this null, and I have this matte layer attached to that null, and the arrowhead is also attached to that null. And the tail is set to use that matte layer to help reveal it. So if I solo that and look at it, you can see it's being wiped on. And because everything is tied to that, you kind of have this sleight of hand effect where everything is moving together. And that's pretty simple to do. You can do that and change the thickness of your stroke or the colors. They don't have to be the same. I created the arrowhead by using a shape layer, which is my favorite way of doing this, although you could also just draw a shape or import something. If you select that from the menu up top here and double click that, I'll solo that so that we can see that. And I twirl this down, you can see that you have some options on the path itself. I'm going to take the stroke off of this so that we can look at it with just the fill. And perhaps you can already see where I'm going with this. But if we turn this down to 3, we now have a triangle, or an arrowhead as you might call it. And this is nice because you also get these outer radius and outer rounding options. So if you want to just slightly change up, there are some limitations, but you can get a little bit more of that. And then you could apply any other effects that you want. You could also just use the pen tool to draw a shape. If you have nothing selected when you use the pen tool, it will create a new shape layer. And if you did that a little bit more cleanly perhaps, you could then give it even more of an arrowhead shape. And all you need to do is parent that to the null object that's already moving and put that into position. Since I created this path freehand, it's not really centered on the anchor point, so I have two options. I can either select the path, and that will select all the points, or I can select them like that. And I can try and move it, but that doesn't work too well because you can't see the anchor point while doing that. Or you can use this pan behind slash anchor point tool, or Y, and if you grab that, you can now put that right there. And now if we hit P to reveal our position, we can zero this out. 0 in the X, 0 in the Y. Hit R to reveal our rotation. We'll rotate that over. See, that needs to be 90 degrees. And I also have scale, so if I wanted to say from here, change that up slightly. Here's my new arrowhead, which functions exactly the same. All right, this is all great. And again, you could see this is a version here where we've just added the zigzag effect to that tail. And if you're not familiar with zigzag, that is one of the options underneath Add on a shape layer. And you could do that on the arrowhead as well. If you twirl this down, you can see Add here, Add Zigzag, and that basically adds this effect into the stack. And if we zoom in to see that a little more closely, we can see what that's doing. And you have an option here to smooth that out. Not saying how useful that is, but it's there if you want it. Same deal here if you want to use some of the other stroke features that are available. If we twirl this down, maybe we don't want the zigzag, we'll select that and delete it. But if we twirl this down to see the stroke and some of those options, we have dashes like we saw earlier in the example for the paper airplane. But I think a more useful one for these arrows is the taper option. And here is what gives you the ability to create a different shape on the tail, which is another quick way to dynamically change this. And if you like the taper but want it to start a little fatter, you can change these end width options. And with end ease and start ease, you can kind of dial in the shape too. So give yourself something a little bit more shapely than just that straight tail. Okay, so this is all great, but what if we want something like this zigzag effect? I created one here kind of doing the same thing, and you can see that it sort of works. It does reveal, but the head is not aligned to the path. That brings us to the setup we're going to talk about today. So the first thing we need to do is get this arrowhead aligned to the path. And that really is a pretty simple thing. All we have to do is select the path, hit Control-C to copy it, and I'll make a new null so that we can see the effect here. Title it new. If I hit P to reveal the position, and select position, and then Control-V to paste, you can see that it put the path into my position. And if I make that a color, you can see that that null is following the exact same path. So let's pretend that we didn't have this. Our arrowhead is down here. We are to move that down here. And we parented our mat to the arrowhead null as well. And now that all follows along. And that kind of works. But this is not following the rotation. We want it to go down here. And once it gets to here, rotate it to be there. And then down. And you might think you need to keyframe all of this, and thank goodness we do not. Instead, there's something called auto orient. And if we applied auto orient to this null, it will automatically rotate it to follow the path. And the way we do that is to hit Control Alt and O, and that brings up auto orientation. And if we click orient along path, hit OK, you can see that without any movement, any keyframing, this null is rotating. It doesn't have keyframes in it, so you could still adjust it after, but it is going to follow that path. And so now we just have to make sure our mat is big enough to cover up the whole thing, because right now it's starting to cut it off. And so we can use our pan behind tool again to move the anchor point to up here. And I'll hit R on this to rotate it so that we can just align that to that. And I think that should probably do it. Okay, and so here you go. One thing you'll notice about the keyframes that get pasted are that they have a normal keyframe in the front and end, but they have these other ones in the middle. And if you actually select one end of them, the other ones move along with that. Those are called roving keyframes. And what that does when you copy and paste it is it automatically figures out what the right speed is to keep that even speed throughout, because otherwise it might go fast here, slow, speed up and slow down throughout based on where the points are in the path. So those roving keyframes help even everything out. Okay, so we have this working out. But what if we look at this example here? We can see that this is a little bit different with the tail. You can see that it's a more simple setup. There's no matte layer. If you're trying to reveal a stroke, there's something else built into After Effects. If you use that Add menu, and you'll see Trim Paths. And if you see, that's what I have applied here. I'll hit UU to reveal everything that's been adjusted. See that I have a Trim Paths applied here, and if I turn the eyeball off on that, you can see the whole path. This is what I originally drew out. I'll toggle the mask and shape path visibility here so that you can see. And this is the path that I copied and pasted, if I hit P, into the position there. So I have my arrowhead going. And then Trim Paths is what takes care of the matte layer. So I don't have that separate matte layer where I have to worry about it being too large. Works great because this is a more complex shape that intersects with itself and would be difficult to do with that. So with Trim Paths, if I turn this off, and I'll just add a new one so that you can see how that works. You twirl that down. What you have is start and end options, and if you scrub this backward, here's a keyframeable setting for the head of that stroke to be revealed. And same with the end of it. So what you can do is animate the end. We'll go down a little bit. And if you want to keep the length the exact same speed, what you can do is go to this keyframe and match the exact same keyframe, and then select those and offset them slightly. Now that will give you a perfect length. But you can see that doesn't line up. So if we were to grab this backward, and what you need to line up is actually the first keyframe so that the arrowhead hits that point at the same point that the end does. And then everything is in sync. And you can determine the length of your tail by offsetting these keyframes. And of course, those don't need to be the same throughout. They can be a little bit more dynamic. So let's say it starts off long, and then right at the end, it all snaps in. Or let's say you don't want to have it go away completely and leave a little bit of a tail. You can just adjust that end keyframe. And this is exactly how we set up the paper airplane animation. The only difference being that on this we use the dash feature on the stroke to give it that kind of trail look. So we added a few dashes in there. Otherwise it's just a blue thin stroke that gets revealed. The one little gotcha with those dashes though is that if we look at this first version, there's something about trim paths that shifts the dashes along the path as it's going through the start and end. And maybe that's what you want, but I also want to show you how to just reveal it in case that's what you want. So I'm going to turn these dashes back on. And if we look at this setup, we now have a matte layer back. And what's happening here is that instead of using trim paths on the tail itself, I duplicated this layer. And I made this layer just a thicker stroke without the dashes. And so that I am now using as the matte layer for the tail. So wherever that is where you see that dash layer without affecting those dashes. And that was quick to do. I just had to make it a little bit thicker so that it covered the entire thing. But with that, if I make that invisible, you can see those dashes are not moving along the path anymore. And that brings us to the end of this tutorial. So if you found this video helpful, please give me a like on this video and subscribe to the channel for more videos and lessons like this. If you have any topics that you'd like me to cover, please drop them down in the comments. I'd be very interested to hear what you're interested in learning, and I'll try and get a video out that covers that topic. Thanks for watching. See you next time.